my pleasure to introduce our instructor for today. We are very fortunate to have Denise McKenzie joining us from California. Denise is an instructor with the National Science Foundation I-Corp program, training university teams from across the US on translating their research into viable startups. She also works with founders and teaches the lean startup methodology at Innovation Node LA. In LA is a collaboration with USC, Caltech, and UCLA. In addition, she works with entrepreneurs at Arizona State University and several accelerators. Denise also has 20 years of experience as a patent litigator. Her practice focused on helping tech companies protect their ideas and inventions from theft by competitors. She also worked as an electrical engineer at a major aerospace company where she developed mathematical models of missile navigation systems. Denise received a Bachelor's of Science degree in Mathematics and Systems Science from UCLA, a Master's of Science degree in Electrical Engineering, and a Juris Doctorate from USC. So she has so much experience, as you can tell, so you all couldn't be in better hands. Denise, thank you for connecting with our Hawaii community. The virtual floor is yours.
Thank you, Sandra. I'm so excited to be here, and I'm really looking forward to working with you all over the next 4 sessions. One thing I want to say is if you have a question, I'm going to be giving a lecture. If you have a question, put it in the chat, but put a Q before your statement so we'll know it's a question, and we'll be looking out for your question. Our session today is going to be interactive. We're going to do, it's not going to just be me sitting up here lecturing for an hour or more. We're going to do some in-class exercises. And I'm going to ask you guys to share. I'll be asking questions because we'll all learn from each other. And so I'm going to share my screen now. So I want to start out by talking about startups, specifically what we used to believe about startups. Basically, that a startup is just a smaller version of a larger company. And this is just wrong. It's not true. The core difference is that a startup does something called search, while larger companies spend their time executing, at least most of their time executing. So you might be thinking, search for what and execute what? And that's what we're going to talk about today. So startups, traditionally, they draft business plans and they start trying to execute their plans. Those business plans include an operating plan, a financial model, and this was just following conventional wisdom. Design my product or service, draft my business plan, hire people, and execute. We now know that this strategy is just wrong. It's just ridiculous. Now, Sandra said that I work for the National Science Foundation, their I-Corp program. And one of the things we always do is we show this image, this kind of scary image of Mike Tyson, that he's a former boxer. But the reason we show it is because he quote that we love. And he says, everyone has a plan until he gets punched in the face. Similarly, no business plan survives the first contact with a customer. The first years of a startup are completely unpredictable. There's so many ups and downs and twists and turns. What you're doing on Monday turns out to be completely wrong on Tuesday. On Wednesday, you discover something new. On Friday, you're almost out of business. And then maybe the next Monday, you get some big cash, a big exit, something incredible happens. It is a roller coaster. And there's no way you can put all of this in a 3 to 5 year business plan. Now, this doesn't mean you shouldn't do any planning. What it means is that you should do planning before the business plan. So we use something called the business model canvas to organize our thinking about all the hypotheses about every part of our business. I'm going to suggest that you get out of the building and actually turn your hypotheses into facts, which I'll talk to you about how to do later. So this canvas is something that you should use regularly. It's sort of like a scorecard for you to keep tabs on your progress about how much you've learned throughout the progress of meeting your potential customers, gathering facts, learning about their problems, so that you can come up with solutions that are actually based on facts and based on your customer. So our new strategy, instead of writing the business plan, we're going to use the business model canvas to actually capture all our hypotheses. And then we'll think about drafting a business plan. The large company executes, spends money on designs, prototypes, hires employees, maybe hires salespeople, manufactures, ships products, but that's not the startup. And so here's our first time where I'm gonna ask for your participation. And I just want to talk about, why do you guys think startups fail? You can raise your hand and just, why do you think they fail? What are some of the biggest reasons? Okay, I think Tayana, is that how you say? Tatiana?
Are you talking to me?
Yes, yes.
I didn't raise my hand, but if I were to answer the question, I would think that just having like a fundamental misunderstanding of what the customer's problems actually are.
How about Lexi?
One problem I see is that they don't associate a brand with the product. So they don't build up their brand. They just focus on the product, which I think is a mistake.
Okay. What about Giovanni? What do you think?
They'll build something that the customer doesn't actually want or need.
Kwang, what do you think?
Run out of money.
Not enough money?
Yeah, run out of money. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's look at what the experts say. The experts say, which is, I think Tatiana, she may have said this, and someone else said this too. There's no market need. Startups fail because there's no market need. So you got to find a way to figure out what the customer wants. And so here's another survey, and it's the same thing. It's basically building something that nobody wants. That's why startups fail. So I like to show this cartoon. It's people sitting around in the office, coming up with ideas. In this particular case, they have a hypothesis about their typical customer, which is a teenage girl. And they're thinking that they can come up with an artificial intelligence type of solution that would help this teenage girl purchase clothing or accessories. But none of them have teenage daughters. They haven't talked to potential customers. They don't know anything about how their potential customers purchases clothing. So the issue with this situation is that, as I said, you have to get out of the building. You have to talk to customers. You have to get an understanding of their problems, of their pain points. So I'll say that. I'll talk to entrepreneurs. I'll talk to founders. And they'll come up with, well, Steve Jobs said, you don't ask people what they want because they don't know. He said, if Henry Ford would have asked customers what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. Now, they would have said that because they're not thinking about what the future would bring with respect to technology. But I just wish he would have never said this, because it doesn't mean that you shouldn't ask your customers. You should talk to your customers. It just means that you should ask a different question. You should ask questions that focus on their problems. And then thinking about solutions, you think about their problem and also keep an eye on how technology is evolving. So what do I mean when I say ask? When I say you should talk to customers? I'm talking about actually going out and interviewing them. And during the interview, you gather information about their problems. What jobs are they doing? What are their pains? How urgent is their problem? And the big thing is, if this problem is a big thing, what happens if it's not solved? Do they lose money? Do they lose their job? Does someone get sued? Do they miss opportunities? What happens if the problem isn't solved? And when you're doing these interviews, you want to talk to enough potential customers so that you find a pattern of pains, a pattern of problems. And you're not selling, you're not going out there saying, hey, I have this product, I have this service. You're asking about their specific problem, their specific issue, and looking for a pattern. So this is an iterative process. You'll start out with having a hypothesis, a guess about, first of all, who your customer is, and then what their problem is. You'll test your hypothesis by interviewing potential customers. And the purpose of this interview is to validate or invalidate your guess. You're trying, as I said, to understand the customer's problems, what's important to them, what keeps them up at night. And then as you gather this information from multiple potential customers, you analyze it and you determine if you need to adjust. Do you need to, maybe who you thought was the customer, maybe that's not the customer. Maybe it's someone else. What you thought about their problems, maybe you were a little bit off. Maybe it's something else based on what you learned. And then you come up with another guess and you iterate. And this is just an iterative process to try to get an understanding of what are the issues that your customer is dealing with. So do you really understand the customer's problem? You're trying to get a feel for, do enough people really care about that problem? And will they care enough to tell their friends? And when the problem and solution answers are met, you have problem solution fit, that's when you're feeling pretty good. So I've been focused on customers. Who is your customers? And this is where I really want you to dig deep. Really coming up with a persona for who your customer is, a customer archetype. So who is the customer? We're going to flesh that out. And I'm going to help you. I'm going to talk about how you get an understanding of your customer. So let's focus on first customer roles. So for those of you where your customer is an actual business, or it's an organization, or it's a government agency, you have to think about how many people are involved in a decision at that entity. If you're selling a software package, or you're changing a process, or you're doing something where multiple people are going to be affected, there's probably a committee involved, a finance team that evaluates investments, a training and development program, a quality review team. And changes in that organization could take months or years, which is fine unless you need sales this year. So you don't want to be surprised. There's a number of people and they each may have different jobs, different points of view, and you need to understand, how is their organization going to affect you? What step of the workflow does your product do? Who all is involved in defining the future updates? Who at the company advocates for change? You're going to ask questions like, who do you work with when you're going to add a new test, a new tool, a new software package? Who do you have to talk to for budgeting? How large is your budget this year? How is it divided up? How much are you spending on the solution today? Now this is important because if they have a problem, they're trying to solve it right now. It may be something that they just jury rigged and put together, but they're trying to solve that problem right now. Oftentimes, I meet entrepreneurs and they say, yeah, I talked to the customer, but they didn't know they had a problem. I had to tell them they had a problem. And if you have to tell them they have a problem, it's not that big of a deal. So you really want to try to figure out what are the issues they are dealing with. So I'm going to show you an example to kind of make this more real, not so complex, something that we can all relate to. So say your product is a surgical scissor or a surgical clamp. And you're thinking about, okay, who could I interview to figure out if this would be a solution to a problem? Well, you might think of maybe there's a director of surgery that makes decisions about purchasing equipment. If this is the case, you would need to get an interview with him and ask questions like, what are your biggest problems when it comes to surgery? And what you're hoping for is that he brings up surgical equipment so that you can dig in and ask more questions about why the surgical equipment is an issue. But maybe the director of surgery, maybe he's not the decision maker about whether to purchase a new product. Maybe it's a committee. And if this is the case, you would need to interview as many members of the committee as possible to get an understanding about how they make decisions and who they're influenced by. Maybe the director of surgery, maybe he's an influencer. Maybe he's merely an end user. Maybe he doesn't have anything to say about the final decision to purchase a new product, new technology. So the patient here in our scenario is just the beneficiary. The patient is certainly not the decision maker. He or she has nothing to say about which surgical scissors are used. But what if the value proposition for this clamp or scissor is that it won't leave a scar? Then a plastic surgeon at the hospital may be a saboteur because that plastic surgeon is getting paid for correcting scars. When I talk about roles in an agency or a company, and I talk about saboteurs, oftentimes founders, they'll say, oh, the saboteur, that's a competitor. The competitor is not the saboteur. I'm talking about somebody in the agency that will be threatened by your new product or your new service. So if we look at here, a chart like this, and we say, okay, who's the user? That's the day-to-day user. The person who makes the final decision to purchase your product. This is really who you want to try to get an interview with. Also the influencer, because the influencer can sway the decision maker. The economic buyer may be, that's the person who writes your check, who pays for your technology. And the saboteur, again, that's a person in the business, in the company who may be threatened by your new product or service. There's also other roles, like people with particular knowledge about the industry, and the beneficiary who actually has no influence about the decision, but they benefit. So when we're thinking about our scenario, our hospital scenario with the scissor or clamp, the decision maker could be a committee, the end user could be the surgeon, influencer could be some kind of organization, saboteur, plastic surgeon, an economic buyer could be someone like the CFO. So these are the roles when your customer is a company, a government agency, or some type of organization. Now, the same thing is true when your customer is an individual consumer. So say, for example, in our scenario, that this is a family and the son in the family wants a video game. He's the end user. We'll say the sister is a saboteur because this son, he's always asking for video games. She wants a family game, something that they all can play together. The parents are the decision makers. So it's the same thing. And if you look at a chart like this, you'll say, okay, who's the end user? It's the son. And you see how I've described him, because I'm trying to make an archetype, a persona. I mean, sometimes you can even give him a name so that you actually know who he is, he or she. And the decision maker, the parents. In this case, with the individual consumer, sometimes one person can have two roles. So in this case, the son would be both the end user and the influencer. The other sibling is a saboteur because they don't want any more video games. They want something different. And the economic buyer here, again, two roles. The parents are both the decision makers and the economic buyer. What I want to do now is I want us to do an exercise. I want you to think about, who is your customer? Is it a business? Is it a government agency? Is it an individual consumer? And what I want you to do is, for your particular customer, I want you to come up with the roles, and then we're going to share. I know here it says 10 minutes. I'm going to give you guys about 5 minutes, and then I'm going to check in on you. So I'm putting on my timer right now. Think about if you want to share. We can have volunteers, or I can call on people. So I just set my timer. And I'll let you know when it rings. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And does anybody want to volunteer to talk a little bit, just a little bit? Tell me what your business or product is and who your customer is, and talk about the roles. Okay, Jamison, do you want to go?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yeah, hey everybody. I live on Kauai. I'm working with the Small Business Development Center over here. I had an idea. There's very little things to do on the island right now. A lot of indoor activities got closed during COVID. And I went to the mainland recently, and I had a really great experience at, it was a arcade, but it had a focus on virtual reality. So there was like multiple stations with PCs with those VR goggles set up. And it was a really, really, really fun group activity. I'm in IT field, so I feel like I can execute this idea pretty well here. So what I put down was, for my end user, we would be looking at a couple scenarios, either young families who like want to bring their kids, even groups of friends coming home from school or after work or college, anywhere from 13 to mid 30s, or maybe even like somebody doing on a date. It could be a good place for that. The decision maker for each of those would be the head of the household, a collective decision from the group, or just whoever is making the plans for the day. Influencer would be somebody who enjoys video games in particular. And sorry, my cat.
Okay.
And the buyer would be either the parents, or they could, all pitch in and share the space for a little bit.
Okay.
There would be anybody who doesn't like video games in particular.
Yeah, Jamison, thanks for sharing. Is anyone else want to share a little bit about their customer? You can just go off mute if you want to share.
Hey, I'm on Kauai also, Jamison. And I had a similar idea as far as for families or whatever, and they're all the same, but a little more capital involved, I think. But a trampoline park, and I did think about having virtual reality incorporated as well in that family entertainment center. So
a similar type idea. Okay.
Right. Here on Kauai, yeah.
I saw one more hand go up and it went down. Does someone else want to share?
Yes.
Okay, go on.
Yeah. My idea is to build up a Vietnamese fast food chain in United States. Yeah, because I see that most of the fast food now is not healthy, and Vietnamese food is very healthy. So yeah, in my opinion, the user are the people or family who do not have time, but they want to eat healthy food. The decision maker are the people who want to buy fast and healthy food. The influencer are YouTubers, doctors, or nutrition experts. The economics buyers, maybe the parents in the family. The supporter is the current fast food companies and traditional restaurants. And others, I think that I need to do more survey because I'm not sure if the market is big enough for my idea.
Yeah, so I like one thing you said about the influencer being like doctors and health providers. That was a good way to identify that. So I'm going to go back to my screen here. Thank you all for sharing. And so we talked about customer roles. Now I want to talk a little bit about customer segments. And customer segmentation involves being specific. So just for an example, like we talked about the scenario with the product being a surgical scissor. So someone might say, hey, my customer is a hospital. And if someone said that to me, I would say like, well, what does that mean? Are you talking about a large teaching or research hospital in an urban setting? Is it a smaller community hospital? And are the needs of the smaller community hospital the same as the large teaching hospital? Is it public? Is it private? Does that matter? Or maybe the customer is not a hospital after all. Maybe it's just a clinic. So when you say my customer is a hospital, what does that really mean? Someone might say my customers, they're schools. So I live in LA. So for example, if you're talking about providing a service to the Los Angeles School District, the customer might be a committee. But things might be different if you're talking about a private school like Punahou. There, the customer might be a vice principal. Might be further different if you're talking about a small rural school in somewhere like Oregon. The decision maker might be the lead teacher. So customer segmentation involves really breaking down who the customer is. So when you say my customer works at a school, what type of school? When you say they work at a hospital, what do you mean? Research, public, private, rural, does that matter? If you say my customer is HR, what does that mean? Is HR at Facebook the same as HR at a government agency? It's important to understand the roles, but it's also important to understand the customer segment. Now, let me talk about a different type of customer segment. So let me see here. There was a team that we worked with, and the team, they developed this really cool powdered condiment. It was sweet, like a cinnamon brown sugar, but it had all the nutrition of a multivitamin. So the founders and co-founder, they said, hey, bodybuilders could mix it in their protein shakes. And in that case, bodybuilders were the customer segment. They said restaurants could leave it on the table as a healthy sugar alternative. And in that case, someone at the restaurant, maybe the manager or the owner, was the customer segment. They said it could even be used by moms to mix this supplement in food and trick their kids into eating healthy. And in this case, the mom is the customer, the kid is the beneficiary. But this entrepreneur was doing interviews, talking to potential customers, bodybuilders, restaurant owners, moms, and getting so confused because they all have different problems, different issues, and therefore different problems, different value propositions. She was running in circles because the bodybuilders wanted one thing, the restaurant owner wanted something different, and the moms needed something else completely different for the kids. So what you want to think about, especially when you have a product or service and you think all these different people can use it, you've got to start with one segment before you begin to branch out. Forget about all the possibilities and focus on who would most likely buy your product and service. For this case, they decided it was the moms. They narrowed it down a little more. Moms with young kids who currently shop at health food stores. See how I narrowed that down? I didn't just say families. I didn't just say moms. I said moms with young kids. I would further say, what does young kids mean? Does that mean, 5 and under who currently shop at health food stores? And the thing about the health food stores, she knew where to find the customer. They shop at the health food store. So you really want to really flesh it out, dig deep. Who is my customer? The reason that customer segmentation is so important is because if you don't segment, you'll get overwhelmed by all the information that you're trying to get from talking to all these different customer segments. And you'll get mixed feedback. You'll have trouble making sense of it, trying to understand what the problems are of one group as compared to the problems of another group. So when you look at companies, people look at companies like Google and they say, hey, Google doesn't sub-segment. They help everyone find anything. But that's not how they started out. They started out very narrow. The same thing, Google used to help PhD students find bits of code. It's the same thing with PayPal. People say, and Venmo, people say PayPal helps anyone send money anywhere. They didn't start out like that. They started out helping collectors buy and sell Beanie Babies. So when you have a fuzzy sense of who you're serving, you end up talking to multiple customer segments all at once. And this leads to confusing problems. So that's what I want you to think about. We're going to share some more during our time together. And I want you to kind of think about who your customer is in terms of an actual archetype. So we talked about customer roles. We talked about customer segments. Now I want to talk about customer workflow. And customer workflow, what does that mean? Customer workflow really is a visual tool for you to help you think about your customer's process and getting an understanding of where you fit. Thinking about the process from the very beginning. From the very beginning, when your customer is saying, hey, where do I start? Say your product is dishwashing liquid, something we all know, dishwashing liquid. Where does it start? Well, first thing it has to start with the dishwashing liquid. So there's some research and development. And then what happens? Maybe there's packaging issues, there's transportation issues, there's distributor issues. And when you're thinking about all that goes on from scratch with the dishwashing liquid to getting it into the hands of the customer, all the different steps, where do you fit? And so what you need to do is brainstorm about everything that happens and think about, okay, with respect to all these different steps, what is the customer struggling with? What are they having issues with? Getting an understanding of that, and then getting an understanding of the process or step that you're replacing. Let me give you an example. So here, the types of questions you will ask yourself and you will ask the potential customer, what are the steps in the process? Going from scratch to getting the product or service to the customer. What materials, time, people are needed. If you look at like Amazon and the process they have for getting a package to a customer, well, what happens first? The customer orders. They charge the credit card. There may be an issue, like if you did some interview with someone at Amazon, there may be an issue with shipping, and you may have a solution related to shipping. So you would need to be able to draw out this process and then indicate where you fit. This is a similar customer workflow. And in this case, this team, they had a product that replaces mammograms. And they drew this workflow. And where they fit is they fit right with the OBGYN. And they said, hey, our saboteurs are the radiologists because they're going to be out of a job. Our beneficiary is the patient. Our end user is the doctor. And the influencer may be an organization. And the decision maker is a committee. So this is how you're thinking about workflow when your customer is a business. So what about if your customer is an individual consumer? A way to think about it is start to think about the problems that your customer faces throughout the day. And are those problems crucial or trivial? At what frequency do they occur? And you want to be able to outline the context in which the problem occurs. When you're thinking about your customer as an individual consumer, you really want to get an understanding of what's called a day in the life. And you ultimately should be able to go up to a whiteboard and diagram for me or anybody else. Here's what my customer does from the moment they get up in the morning, when they're at work or when they're at school, from the products, software, or tools they use. If they have a car, what kind of car do they drive? What do they read? Do they work out? At first, when you're thinking about your customer, all these things you might not know. They might just be guesses. And if you really don't have a deep understanding of that customer, you won't have a deep understanding of where your product or service fits. So we're going to do another exercise. And what I want you to think about is if your customer is a business, I want you to think about, from the very beginning, from scratch to getting it to the customer, to packaging, distributing, doing any research and development, whatever. Where do you fit? If it's an individual consumer, from the time they get up in the morning to the time they go to bed, all the things they're dealing with, where do you fit? And really think about what it is in their flow that you are replacing. So I'm going to give you guys, because this is a little bit more complex, you're going to have to brainstorm about 7 minutes. I'll check in. I'm going to put my timer on, and then we're going to share. But this is all about getting an understanding of where you fit in the process. So I've got my timer right now, and I'll check in a couple of minutes.
Denise, there are a couple of questions in chat.
Okay.
Fatima asks, what could happen if we don't look at customer workflows?
What could happen is you won't. So one thing you want to understand, does the customer have a problem? And you want to get an understanding of how urgent that problem is. So when you look at customer workflow, you can get an understanding of how often they're dealing with that problem. Say, I'm going to give you an example. Say they only deal with a problem once or twice a year. It's a big problem, but they only deal with it once or twice a year. Well, they might not be willing to adopt a new solution. So you're trying to figure out and looking at really what we call a day in the life. Does this problem, are they dealing with it frequently enough that they would consider adopting a new technology, adopting a new service, adopting a new solution? If you don't understand that, you could end up investing in a startup where your customer doesn't really have an urgent unmet need. So I don't know, does that answer your question?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
And then Christy asks, some businesses start out where they're open to all types of customers to just make money. So do you recommend them using customer segmentation instead? For example, a cleaning business may service from resident to commercial businesses. Would they just focus on one segment?
So you said like a cleaning service, right? So if, so I will assume the cleaning service, maybe they're going to clean businesses. And so they may focus on a type of business, right? So it may be smaller business with a particular revenue. So in that way, you're segmenting. You're saying that my service, instead of like a large business like Amazon or Google, I may target mom and pop type businesses. That's a way of segmenting. What this exercise is about, both understanding the customer roles and the customer workflow, is to push you to come up with a persona for your customer. When you come up with a persona for your customer, you have a real understanding of whether your solution will solve their problem. And you also have an understanding, and we're going to get to this, of where they look for solutions, because you're going to get to know them. So I'm going to ask someone to share about the workflow. So if you want to share your screen, if you scribbled something out, you can share that. If you want to talk about it, you can share that. But I want to get us thinking like this, because this is what customer discovery is about. So I'm going to ask for someone who hasn't already shared with us to share a little bit about their workflow, the workflow of the customer. Now, what you'll have to do, you have to tell us a little bit about your product or service, and then talk about the workflow, and then tell me where you fit. Does anybody want to go? Just come off mute and go.
Yeah, I can share.
Okay.
This is Giovanni. The idea is based on one of my class projects where we want to either use, so you know those 3D cameras that real estate agents will use? We want to use that to create places in the metaverse, which would be like a less expensive development, and or create 3D rendering models where people could tour a building through virtual reality. So to kind of map out the customer flow, I just made like a simple little chart of like you can't really see it, but the home buying process.
Okay.
So, you know, you have to find an agent, get pre-approval for mortgage, list of what your needs are, house viewings. So I think our company would kind of line the house viewing portion
Okay.
when people are looking at homes. And then from there, they would go into the offer, escrow, and close.
Okay. Okay. That's good. Thank you, Giovanni. Does anyone else want to share? Kwang, I see you. You want to share? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So our startup idea is about the Vietnamese fast food chain, and yeah, to answer your question, yeah, we think that our startup will fit the time that people would like to buy food to eat or to have food to eat. So people wake up every day, so they go to school or they go to their workplace, so they need to take some food with them. Yeah, and it would be better if they can take the healthy food at our fast food stores, and at lunch and at lunch they can at the school or at the workplace. Yeah, I can order the food from our store, and when they go home, yeah, they can stop by our store to get some food for their dinner. And we are replacing the junk food and the cooking time of our customers.
Okay. Okay. That's good. So what I'm going to tell you guys, just really think about volunteering, because we really all learn when people share their thoughts and their ideas, because it will make you think about your thoughts and ideas about your product or service. Okay. So one of the things that I talked about is you may be guessing about your customer workflow. You may not have talked to your customer about the workflow, but even if you did, what do they have problems with? And so when you're thinking about gathering this information, gathering facts, what types of questions would you ask? So first of all, you want to get an understanding of the role of the person you're talking to, because you want to focus your interviews on decision makers. That should be your number one target, the decision maker. If you can't get the decision maker, you want to get the influencer, and then maybe the end user. But you really want to know the role of the person that you're talking to. You want to get an understanding of the current workflow. You could even draw out the workflow and say, hey, is this the way things work? So that you can get an accurate understanding of all the steps that have to take place, what the issues are, and hopefully one of the issues have to do with the solution that you have. And then you want to kind of talk about, like, what are the biggest issues that they're dealing with, and really get an understanding, as I said, of who the customer is. So I've been talking a lot about the customer's problems and understanding, okay, once we identify the customer, once we identify the roles, what are their pains? What are the things they're trying to decrease or eliminate? And then what are their gains? What is it that they are wanting to achieve? And so I have a worksheet here that I'd like us all to look at. And I'm going to see if I can put it in the chat. So bear with me a minute, and I'm going to see if I can do it here. So that worksheet should look like this. If you can see it, it'd say like customer pains. I don't know if you can see that, but get the one that says customer pains. Everybody download that. And you'll notice that that sheet has 9 questions on it. What I'd like you to do is identify 3 that you can answer about your customer. If you can't answer 3, you might have to guess. So I'm going to give you like 2 minutes, and then we're going to share again. So for someone who hasn't shared with us before, can you identify your business and talk about the pains based on 3 of these questions? You can just come off mute and share. Or I can call on someone too as well. Does anybody want to share? Tiffany, are you going to share?
Yes, can you hear me? Hopefully there's not too much background.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. So I guess I should say I am an entrepreneur already. So my husband and I already have an appliance repair business, but we're kind of in one of those low funks right now. So kind of, I guess, question number one, how do your customers define too costly? Ours is just the price that we charge for the repairs. You know, like, because it takes us time to drive to the place and to do the repair, as well as getting all the parts in and all of that. So that's kind of, sometimes they're like, oh, that's just too much, you know, and I'm like, well, you know, it just kind of took us like an hour just to get to your place. So kind of letting them know that our travel time is included in that. What makes your customers feel bad? Their frustrations is right now, because of COVID, a lot of the parts are on like back order. So it takes what, you know, like that's out of my control, but their frustration is they want their washer fixed, you know, so they don't have to go to the laundromat, but because of the back order from the factory, we're just kind of very stuck. So that's where we have.
Okay. Well, thanks for sharing that, Tiffany. Let me just ask a question here. One of the big things, what is keeping your customers awake at night? What are they most concerned about? What are their worries? Anybody, if you know that, or you have a hypothesis about your customer, share with us. I saw a hand. You just come off mute and speak up.
Yes. Yeah, I think that the problem that my potential customer has is the feeling about the conflict between wanting the food fast and to protect their health. Yeah, people want to save time, but people have to get the junk food, so they know that it's bad for their health, but they have to do that because there's no offer for healthy food fast. So our startup will solve that problem for our customer.
Okay, thank you. And so what about Jesse?
Hi, so my business idea is a small scale farm that grows specialty produce that's otherwise very hard to find in Hawaii, and is also difficult to ship. And so I think that what would keep my customers up at night, so my sort of end user I'm thinking would be upscale restaurant chefs. And I know what keeps them up at night is undependable and inconsistent supply of produce.
Okay, that's good. Thanks for sharing that, Jesse. And so I want you guys to also get out this other sheet. It's called customer gains. So we're gonna work with that a little bit. So get that ready. So I wanted you guys to get a feeling of what I was talking about when I say customer pains, because I'm always using that language. You should think of your solution as a painkiller that produces savings, it ends challenges, it fixes a bad solution, you may impact the communications in a positive way, improve safety, eliminate risk. So when you're talking to your customer, when you're doing customer interviews, you're getting an understanding of their pains. You need to be thinking about, okay, well, my solution, is it a painkiller? And we talk about, in SF, we say, well, maybe your solution is just a vitamin. And if a vitamin is something, it just would be nice to have. But if someone's in pain, they need a painkiller right now. So that's what you want to be thinking about. So I want you guys to look at the customer gain sheet. And let me ask this question about your customer. what would make your customer's job or life easier? Does anybody know that about their customer?
May I speak?
Yeah, Joe.
Yeah. I think that I'm not going to talk about a specific business, but I think in any business in general, one thing that can make the customer's life easier, it's usually cutting the number of people that touch any situation, because human error is a very common thing that happens in most business, right? So if I was talking, for example, about an accounting software that I want to sell for a company, and the company is usually doing this by hand, and they have multiple people having to pass through that process, from gathering the information to then listing it correctly, and then they have to add everything, and by the end they have to see how much each customer spend on it. With one accounting software, you're able to do all this, gather the information already like organized and everything. You're avoiding human errors on this process, and that can save a lot of money and also save a lot of time, which means that you can pay, like, your employee hours that you spend can be directed in a different direction of the business, and you can start having less headache with something that's automated and expanding your business in areas that become more relevant at that point, because that problem is mostly solved.
And so it sounds like that you're thinking that, I guess, mistakes. So a value proposition would be to reduce the mistakes by maybe 10% or something like that by automating a process.
Exactly.
Okay. Anyone else? How does your customer measure success and failure? Do you guys know that about your customer? This is something that's so important to understand, how they measure success and failure, because what you're wanting to understand is the minimum performance that they need in order to switch. And this is, again, where you're asking them questions, and you're trying to understand that workflow and also a day in the life. And understanding these things will help you to understand the value proposition that you can add to the customer. So when we talk about customer gains and we think about your solution, it's, again, thinking that you will be a gain creator. You will help the customer have a happy beneficiary. They will have better outcomes, be able to have positive communications. Their job or life is easier. So you're thinking of, my solution is a painkiller or a gain creator. So when we talk about the value proposition, what we want to be able to do is have a one-to-one match between our customer, our decision maker, and the value proposition. And the value proposition is directly related to, are you solving your customer's problems? Are you satisfying a particular customer need? And I'm going to talk about that in the terms of pains and gains. So that's why I wanted to go through that process. So I ask people all the time, entrepreneurs, what is your value proposition? And when I ask that question, they start telling me what they do. Like, what they do, that's not the value proposition. That's the product or service. And I say that, what you do, that's not the value proposition. And then they start talking about how they do it. Well, how they do it, that also is not the value proposition. Those are features. And when I say, why is it important? Meaning, why should anybody care? That's the value proposition. So when we begin sharing just like we're sharing now, I'm asking you questions about your business, asking you to identify your customer, asking you, about your value proposition. And I'm always going to say, who cares? Why should they care? What happens if their problem isn't solved? And we talked about, when we're looking at metrics for success. Oh my goodness, you have to understand this. And people will say, hey, well, my solution is better. My solution is faster. My solution is cheaper. And I mean, no words with ER are appropriate here, because I don't know what that means. I don't know what faster means. I don't know what better means. You have to quantify it. If you say better, well, how much better? Is it like, and I don't even know what better means, maybe faster. Is it like 10% faster? Is it 15% cheaper? And is that enough for the customer to switch what they're already doing to switch to your product, to your service, to your technology? What you're looking for is a knee in the curve. How good does your solution have to be? What will it take for a potential customer to switch? So I'll go through all that and I'll say, hey, not faster, not cheaper, not better, quantify it. And then people say, well, my solution is more efficient. I'm like, what does that mean? What does more efficient mean? What are the metrics that your potential customer is using to determine that something is a success or failure? The way you find out is whatever issue that they're dealing with, you say, tell me a story. Tell me about the last time you dealt with that problem. And you want to get an understanding of why they were annoyed, why they were challenged, why something was hard, and what happens if that problem isn't solved. So I have an example here. And it's kind of an odd example, but it's an example of a backpacker. And I'm going to give you guys this example, and then we're going to try to figure out how you determine what a value proposition would be. So I'm going to need you guys to participate here when we share. So does anybody know what this is? Yes.
Sleeping bag.
Sleeping bag. It is. It's a sleeping bag. And it's a 0-degree sleeping bag. It's very pricey. So assume that's the product. We're going to go through an exercise here where we're going to pretend like we're going to do an interview. I'm going to be the customer. We're going to do an interview and see if you guys can figure out what my problem is and what a value proposition would be. So when you start looking at a customer segment, so you can say, hey, all these different people can use a sleeping bag, but as I told you, we want to narrow in until the customer that is most likely to want to pay a large amount of money for the sleeping bag. So we say, hey, who are the customer segments, potential customer segments? Could be, anybody that likes outdoors. That's just absolutely too broad. Okay. We could say a car camper. No, because they could sleep in their car when they're camping. Weekend hiker. They may not even need a sleeping bag. Backpacker. Well, maybe. Or we could say a snow camper. Now, this is someone who hikes in mountains, goes up high, and it's snowing. Well, that person might want to purchase this sleeping bag. And so you think about, okay, if you're going to identify that person as a snow camper, what are the types of questions you would ask that person? What are the biggest challenges when they are snow camping? And when you think about your process, you have a product, that's the what. You have the features, that's the how. And so maybe if this person has never purchased a sleeping bag, maybe survival would be a value proposition. But what if, as I said, they already have a sleeping bag and you're wanting them to switch to your product or service? And this is where I want everybody just yell out if you can. Pretend that I'm the snow camper. How would you find out what my pains are? What questions would you ask me so you could figure out the value proposition? I want us to go through this process because this is what you would need to do if you were going to interview a customer. So anybody, just start asking me questions about my process as a snow camper to see.
What is your
Okay, go on.
What is your biggest problem when you sleep inside the sleeping bag?
My biggest problem is that I'm not warm enough.
What did you not like the last time you used your sleeping bag?
That is such a great question. What I didn't like is to get to where I want to camp, have to carry everything on my back. And when I say everything, I mean my tent, my sleeping bag, stuff to cook with, my food, change of clothes for like 3 days. And it's like 30
So the
pounds
volume of your sleeping bag bothers you. Is that correct?
Well, okay. That was a leading question. So try to
Does
ask
the
me
volume of your sleeping bag bother you?
No, that's still leading.
Okay. What would be a better option for you to make all these problems of the volume that you're carrying? What will be the solution for you and your perspective in terms of sleeping bag? What would you expect from a sleeping bag?
Okay, that's better. That's better. Notice how, what, how, who, when, those are the types of questions. So he in his mind, he's thinking volume is a problem. He wants to go straight there and ask me that question. I have to say volume is a problem. Okay. Now, for me, it's not so much the volume for the sleeping bag. What the issue is the weight of my pack. That's my issue.
Was your last sleeping bag heavy?
Yeah, it was heavy. And so I feel like if I could just make that pack lighter.
How heavy was it?
It's 30 pounds.
No,
Not
I mean
the sleeping bag. No, my whole pack was 30 pounds. Okay. I think the sleeping bag may have been maybe like 5 pounds.
Okay.
You also mentioned that you were cold, that's a problem for you. Where do you feel the coldest when you're sleeping? What areas of your body do you feel like you feel the most cold?
My extremities, like my feet, feel cold. My hands are cold. Okay, let me show you guys something. I'm gonna go back to share. You guys are asking good questions. The thing that's very difficult is to stay away from leading. So one thing you're asking me, tell me about the last time, that was good. And so let me share here. So one thing I kept saying is my pack is so heavy. Joe was getting there talking about volume because that's a problem too. But like my pack was so heavy that it was hurting my back. So if someone came up with sleeping bag or anything else that could lower my pack weight by 10%, that would be a great value proposition. But it's based on understanding my story. But what you also need to kind of figure out is, how often do I go snow camping? Because what if I go like once every 5 years or something like that? Well, then I might just think that I can deal with that. So another question is, even if you get an idea that my pain is weight, well, okay, is that an urgent issue? And to understand if it's urgent, you need to look at how frequently I do this job. For me, this job is going snow camping, right? So you need to ask questions to figure out the urgency. Ask questions to figure out really how important it is to me. Okay, what happens if that problem isn't solved? So the problem is weight of my pack. What happens if it isn't solved? Well, for me, my back aches and then I can't go camping again. So if you have like this video game thing, the people were talking about, okay, the arcade, right? So what happens if the family if they aren't entertained? Or what's the issue with that? Is it okay? Or if it's not okay? If it's not okay, what happens? Is it just nice to have this entertainment, or is it something that they just need for the resiliency of their family? I mean, you really got to get an understanding of why it would matter to them. This takes practice, because you really have to flesh it out. Like, see, once I started telling you that story, every part of it, you should say, why? Like, why is it a problem for you? To try to get an understanding of who I am as a person, or who I am as a business. So if you have a team, you would get together with your team and you would brainstorm about what it is you want to know about your customer. If you're an individual with an idea, just for a couple of days, sit around and think, hey, what do I want to know about this customer? And then revisit that day 2. What are all the things I want to know? How can I find that out without leading the potential customer? So that's not, yeah, go on.
So if the problem is, let's say, back pain, right, of carrying heavy object, then the sleeping bag is not the issue, right? Because it's only 5 pounds, and then that means if it's 30 pounds, it's only 25. The other 25 pounds is something else. That means that your product is going to be something else than other than sleeping bag.
And that is so good, right? Because that would mean that you don't have a solution that's going to solve my problem.
Right. So you're saying not to lead, but if you want to sell your product, you might have to say something about the temperature, or something about sleeping, or when in the night, or while you're camping. Is that leading, or is that like because then you'll have to lead a little bit, right? Because it's not productive if you just ask them and then they're not interested in your product.
So that is such a good question, because what we're talking about, customer discovery, it's not about selling your product.
Oh, okay.
You're not selling at all. The whole purpose of this is to get an understanding of who your customer is and the issues they're dealing with. That person you're talking to might not even be the right customer. If the sleeping bag is not the, as you say, right, it's something else. So that's what you're trying to figure out. Do you have a solution that solves their problem? You're looking for problem solutions fit. This, you guys, this part right here is not about selling. You may sell later down the road, but right now you're trying to figure out who is the customer, what the customer's problem is. You're looking for problems. Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah,
In my case, it's a little more generalized, where say it's a rainy day and there's nothing to do. There's really nothing to do. There's, off the top of my head, what I can think of is one movie theater and one bowling alley. That's it. And I think that a large part of my customer base is actually going to be tourists. To be honest, in that case, how would you factor in that, where it's not somebody who is going to be a regular, but you know that there's a regular influx of tourists who would be potentially interested in your product?
I think you could talk to the tourists,
yeah,
and get an understanding of what their issues are, what their problems are,
right,
and hopefully find a representative archetype.
And to be honest, I kind of do know. I work at a hotel.
Okay.
Yeah, I work with these tourists all the time, and yeah, that's like the number one thing that happens is when it rains, they don't have anywhere to go. They, there's nothing for them to really do. So
yeah,
I don't know. I'm not trying to like sell my thing, but yeah, it's just interesting.
Okay.
Sorry, I have a question about when asking these questions, is it best to do it like synchronously through telephone interviews, or can this be done through a survey or other means?
So I discourage a survey, and let me tell you why. Because people always want to do a survey, and I discourage a survey because you can't follow up. Remember when Joe, he was Joe, I don't know if I'm pronouncing your name right. Is it Joe? Well, he was asking me questions, and I said,
it's good enough, teacher, professor.
Oh, okay, thank you. And I said, what you want to be able to do is follow up. When you ask someone, tell me a story about the last time you dealt with this problem, and they're going to tell you. And then when they say something is hard, and when they say something costs too much, or when they say it took too long, you want to say, okay, why is that? Why is that an issue? Like, what happens if you can't shorten the time? If you do a survey, you don't, it's difficult for you to find out a way to follow up. Does that help?
Yeah, also, how about focus groups?
Focus groups are okay because you can ask, you can follow up, like, in the way that I'm thinking is beneficial.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah.
So why not with the survey type question? Because I'm thinking like Facebook surveys, right? Or something like that, where you can ask, I'm assuming you can ask questions and then follow-up questions corresponding with their answers, or something like that, where you could dig deeper. It's not just a one question survey or something like that.
So what I think you can do is you could use a survey to maybe identify people that you would interview. If you wanted to go on Facebook, and if they answer questions, then maybe one of the survey questions, would you be willing to participate in an interview? So that you can dig deeper into the issues.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
Sorry, I have one question that's kind of going back to the video game example.
Mm-hmm.
So you're saying the decision maker is the parent, right? But wouldn't it be the vendor? Because then they're the one who's going to buy your product instead of the customer. So the vendor wants a certain item that sells a lot, then they may ask, the creator or, the manufacturer to make this product.
No,
So I think it depends on who your customer is. If your customer is going to be a business, maybe the video game distributor or something like that, then you look at what's the value proposition of the business. If your customer is, if you're selling directly to the end user, then they may have a different value proposition. So this is where I was talking about like customer segmentation, like who is your customer? So you could have two types of customers. You could say, hey, my customer is the video game distributor or video game developer, or my customer is the individual consumer, and they may have different value propositions, but you need to decide where you want to focus. Does that help?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. Like maybe another example is the farmer. Okay, so like it will be the vendor, right? Because it will be the supermarket, because you're not gonna sell it directly to the person, because then they're not gonna go directly to you to buy the product.
Well,
So
the supermarket would be the distributor.
right, the distributor, that'll be the decision maker to buy your product. It's not the parent or any other. So what will that be? Um, so yeah, so that's sort of like the analogy I was trying to make, but
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. You're saying what would make them put your product on the shelf? Like that's the kind of question you're asking.
yeah.
And so what you need to do is talk to them about how they choose products. And probably what they're really going to want to do, it's going to have to do with revenue, right? And if your product is helping them increase their revenue or bring customers in or something like that. But again, it's deciding who the customer is and trying to figure out what their issues are.
Would it be more efficient to interview the vendors to
if that's your customer, and I'm going to talk about that, really understanding the ecosystem that you find yourselves in. We will talk about that in our next session, okay? So this process is identifying the customers, and we talked about that. Customer segments, understanding the roles of the customer, and then based on what you find to be problems, designing a value proposition. And that value proposition is going to be not something that's cheaper, faster, better, but quantifiable, relevant, specific, so that you know when you provided that value proposition to the customer, you know it. And so this involves getting your customer to tell a story, understand whatever jobs they're doing, being able to quantify that metric and segment your customers based on their pains. We talked about pains and gains. So you want to make sure that you're able to group customers that have the same pains and gains so that you can have a one-to-one match between your customer and the value proposition. So when we think about a customer, whether it's an individual consumer or a business, you really want to think about that question that I'm asking. What happens if the problem isn't solved? So if you have a customer that's happy with the current solution, they are not going to think about adopting your technology or buying your product or service. If they're okay with the solution, they may not either. They may think, hey, it's just nice to have. But what you want is a customer whose current solution is bad, so that your product, your service is a must-have. Like if they don't solve that problem, they lose money. Maybe someone gets fired. You want to get an understanding of how often they're having the problem. Why is it bad? Why is it difficult to use? And you want them to have such an urgency about a solution that they say, give it to me right now. Like this guy in the desert. This guy, he needs that water bottle. He's in the desert. He's thirsty. That's what you want. You want someone to need your solution, need your product, need your service, because they have an urgent unmet need. The thing you need to understand as well is how much does it cost to switch? So if you're looking at a company, do they have to hire people? Do they have to buy new equipment? You don't want to surprise them. You want to look at what they're already using and make sure that your product, your service, your solution, your technology can fit in without causing too much disruption to what they're already doing. So I want to do one more exercise before we end tonight. And it's tonight for me, at least. And I want you to think about you know what your product or service is, but why is it important to your customer? Does it save them like 10% in labor costs? I want you to be that specific. Does it increase some sort of opportunity? Are they able to move 15% faster? Try to quantify it as best you can. When you're doing this, think about that workflow I was talking about. Think about what step are you replacing and how are you improving on that? So I'm going to give you guys 2-3 minutes and then we'll share. And I want you to think about your customer segment too, like be able to specifically describe it. You know, remember how I said, if you say a hospital, okay, what kind of hospital? If you say a school, what kind of school? If you say a human resources, where is it at? If you say tourist, is it all tourists? Is it a certain socioeconomic level? I mean, what do you mean? So be able to identify your customer and why is the value proposition, why is it important? I'm gonna give you like 3 minutes. Zhao, do you want to share?
Well, I think that I keep coming back, like I would like to do an app for accounting for small business, for example. I think there's a few there, but
what's
the
their
entire
problem?
process the problem is like a lot of the small business, they don't have enough people working in the company. They don't have the funds to pay a lot of people, right? So they have to have organized accounting. Otherwise, they can lose a lot of revenue with that if they don't keep their stuff organized. There's taxation in the end of the year. There's payments. There's revenues, expenses.
Let me ask you something. How are they solving that problem right now?
So right now they usually have to get something on the cashiers, and then they gotta keep receipts of everything that they do and all that. And they usually have to have a few people going and verifying all that, right? I think that with there's softwares already that do all their apps, they can have all in one place, and that would keep it organized, and you would actually be able to have less expenses with employees, can pay less people. You can save a lot of hours in general, and also I think you can save money in terms of like auditing and all that stuff.
So Zhao, so what I think now, so these are your hypothesis about, maybe you know some people, but this is your hypothesis about what their problem would be. And it sounds like one of the major things for you is they would maybe save on labor costs. So what you would need to find out is how much savings is enough for them to switch what they're already doing now.
Got it.
Okay. Does anyone else have a way of, you want to talk about your customer segment and your value proposition, and it's why should anybody care, you know? So does anyone else want to share?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Research show that having junk food increase the mortality risk by 18% for every time that you consume junk food. So our startup with the healthy fast food will help eliminating that risk for you.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Does anyone else want to share with respect to the customer segment and your value proposition?
I'll go ahead and share. My name is Grayson. I'm a mechanical engineering student. And what I notice most in mechanical engineer students is that they spend a lot of time in lecture and reading textbooks, but they don't understand the content still. And so usually they'll fall behind. My value proposition is to provide tutoring service specified for their class that's like show them the material in a very simple way. And this is important because it can save them 2 hours a night potentially on homework and reading textbooks. But in the long run, if they fail that class, it will save them 5 months. Like, oh, it's a whole semester. You would have to retake a class for a semester. Furthermore, it's important that they pass their classes so they can get the actual degree and get a well-paying job, especially for the state of Hawaii. It has a really high rate of living. Everything's expensive here. So they can actually get their engineering degree and get a well-paying job to create a living for themselves.
Okay. So how would you further define that customer segment? You just said mechanical engineering student. What is a way you could further define them? Would it be like freshman, sophomore? Huh?
Sophomore to junior year. So that's the very specific engineering courses.
Okay. So see, that's good. That's what you want to do. You want to come up with almost an archetype of who they are so that you could come up with a name, you know, and this is who my customer would be so that you know them and you could identify them.
Right.
Okay. So does anyone else want to share? Anne, I see you shaking your head. Do you want to share?
Okay, so my product along with my team is a language learning app, and the customer segment, it's kind of wide, but I'll narrow it down to adult language learners who are financially independent. And why is it important? Our value proposition is because current existing apps, language learning apps out there do not actually use techniques that are informed by second language research. So my team and I are all from second language research in that background, and we would like to develop something with activities that are methods backed up by most recent research.
So let me tell you something. You're telling me what you do as your value proposition. Okay. Why should they care? Think about. I know it's hard to think like that, but why should the customer care? Why should they care that you're doing it with second, language researchers? Yeah. Why should they care?
Because it will help them be able to read a book in a foreign language or talk to somebody in a foreign language.
But they're already, so if that's a problem, they're already trying to do that, right? Mm-hmm. So what extra are you going to give them? I mean, you might not know now, and I know I'm putting you on the spot, but think about that for next time we all get together. And that's how I really want you guys to noodle on this. Before we come to our next meeting. So thank you. Thank you all so much for sharing and engaging, because that will make our time together so much more beneficial. So right now, I think we have like 8 minutes left for any questions you guys have for me. I'm looking in the chat, I don't really see too much, but if you want to just come off mute and ask questions, let me tell you a little bit about the next sessions, because there are 4 sessions. So what we spent time on today is focusing intently on who is my customer, and then what's the value proposition. Next time, we're going to talk a little bit about customer relationships. We're going to talk about finding partners. We're going to talk about cost and revenue, but we're going to go through all the different parts of a business. We're going to talk a little bit more about how you interview customers, because I'm really going to encourage you to do that, to have facts from your customer before you invest money and resources into starting a business. Okay. So that's it for me, Sandra.
Okay, just real quick, Denise, there was a question in the chat about two-sided marketplaces. So is there any,
So if you have a two-sided marketplace, so we talk about the business model canvas, you will need 2 different business model canvases, for each side of the market, because there may be different value propositions. And so I don't know if that answers that question, but that's the way you look at that. So you'll have a customer and a value proposition for one side of the market, and then a customer and a value proposition for the second side. And you can work those in parallel, but they're different because they have different value propositions. So look forward to seeing you guys on Saturday and engaging with you. And if you have any questions for me specifically, you can contact Sandra and she could get them to me and I'll try to respond.
Thank you all for participating. We hope to see you on Saturday.